The narrative about the discovery of a new 3 million-year-old human species and the rewriting of Aztec history through DNA mixes facts from paleoanthropology with dramatic interpretations of the expansion of pre-Columbian empires. Science does, in fact, use genetics to track migrations and population replacements, but the conclusions are often more complex than the simplified idea of a brutal control system. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. The discovery of skeletal remains in Tlatelolco, one of the main urban centers of the Aztec Empire, revealed evidence of ritual sacrifices and mass executions, practices already known from Spanish accounts and indigenous codices. However, modern DNA and isotope analysis has allowed scientists to identify that many of the victims were not local Aztecs, but rather individuals brought from distant regions in various parts of Mexico. This proves that Aztec control involved a logistics of human tribute that fueled the religious and political system of the capital, Tenochtitlan. What DNA truly reveals is not just blood and replacement, but the vast reach of the empire, and how it integrated or subjugated different ethnic groups. The bone found in Tlatelolco functions as a biological archive. It reveals the diet, geographic origin, and ultimate fate of those who lived under the rule of the Triple Alliance. Instead of destroying history, this genetic evidence deepens it, showing that the empire was a mosaic of peoples united by a rigorous power system that, in the end, facilitated its downfall when the Spanish knew how to exploit these internal tensions. The legend of the Aztecs, or Mexica, as a single people originating from the mystical land of Aztlan, has been challenged by genetic evidence revealing a far more complex reality. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA from skeletons found at ceremonial sites has debunked the myth of a uniform lineage. Instead of an isolated tribe, the data showed a mixture of haplogroups linked to various peoples of the Gulf Coast, Oaxaca, and northern Mexico. This proves that the Mexica did not arise from a single migration, but from a collision of cultures, conquests, and assimilations of older civilizations, such as Teotihuacan. This historical deconstruction became even darker with the study of the island city of Xaltocan, the ancient capital of the Otomi people. DNA revealed an abrupt genetic disappearance. The original population was not only absorbed, but entirely replaced by new groups after the Aztec rise. What the laboratories discovered was a pattern of population replacement that suggests brutal control, where entire genetic signatures were erased from history. Thus, the Aztec trajectory ceases to be a narrative of heroic migration and becomes a record of aggressive expansion that silenced and replaced the cultures that preceded it. For generations, their city flourished until 1428, when the Mexica and their allies from Texcoco and Tlacopan invaded. Historical records stated that the Otomi were peacefully integrated into the empire or relocated elsewhere. But science has told a different story. In 2012, researchers from the University of Texas, led by Dr. Deborah Bolnick, analyzed the mitochondrial DNA of 25 skeletons found on the island. Some belonged to people buried before the conquest, others after. The contrast between the two groups was startling. The oldest remains carried haplogroups B2 and C1, unmistakable genetic signatures of the Otomi. But after the conquest, these markers practically disappeared. In their place emerged haplogroups A2 and D1, lineages linked not to Xaltocan, but to the central Mexica territories far to the south. The change was too abrupt to be explained by intermarriage or migration. In just one generation, nearly 70% of the city's maternal ancestry had been replaced. It was as if the women of Xaltocan had simply vanished, leaving no trace of their lineage. To scientists, it seemed less like assimilation and more like a silent purge, a rewriting of the city's genetic identity under Aztec rule. And when researchers compared these findings with DNA from nearby settlements, they noticed the same disturbing pattern repeating itself. Xaltocan was not an isolated case. It was the first clear sign of something much larger, a calculated erasure hidden beneath the grandeur of the empire. If the people of Xaltocan could disappear so completely, what about the other peoples conquered by the Aztecs? Subsequent discoveries would reveal that the disappearance was no accident. It was a system created to rewrite the very roots of the empire, the hidden purge that reconfigured an empire. As more samples of ancient DNA were analyzed throughout the Aztec Empire, the pattern repeated itself. Local lineages disappeared, replaced by families linked to the central Mexica territories or to allied groups in the north. The scale of this genetic disruption goes far beyond assimilation or ordinary migration. Researchers now call this demographic replacement. In other words, entire populations were wiped out and replaced, creating a human patchwork quilt under imperial control. The logistics of this seem impossible. Replacing the genetic identity of a city requires moving thousands of people across mountains, lakes, and valleys. This was not just conquest, it was systematic population engineering, what some scientists are calling genetic colonization. The empire wasn't just taking land, it was actively reshaping who lived on it. The more researchers investigate, the more disturbing the story becomes. Millions of lives were affected, their ancestral lineages erased, leaving gaps in both the historical and genetic records. And here's the twist. The Aztec origin myth about a homeland to the north, Aztlan, may hold the key. The DNA suggests that this migration was not just a legend. It may have been part of one of the largest coordinated population movements in pre-Columbian America. The DNA pointed to something deliberate, something calculated. But who exactly was behind it? The answer lay hidden deep within the Y chromosome, the genetic signature of the parents who made the substitutions, the coalition hidden in their blood. Just when scientists thought they finally understood the Aztec story, DNA revealed a bombshell. The legendary land of Aztlan may not have been just a myth. It could have been the missing link in one of the greatest population shifts in pre-Columbian history. The more scientists investigated the genetic wreckage of the region, the stranger everything became. Beneath the maternal changes that wiped out entire lineages, a new signal emerged on the Y chromosome, the genetic trail passed down from father to son. And what it revealed was not just migration. It was a secret army formed from scattered worlds. This proves that the Aztec rise did not originate from a single people, but from an invading coalition so diverse that it almost defies logic. While maternal DNA told the story of who was replaced, the Y chromosome showed who performed the replacement. This genetic chain is passed only from father to son, a kind of living code of ancestry. When researchers mapped Y chromosomes from ancient remains found around Tlatelolco and compared them with modern descendants, the pattern shattered the old myth of a single Mexica tribe marching from a northern paradise called Aztlan. The data pointed to a genetic storm, dozens of lineages colliding simultaneously. A study of over 500 men from central Mexico found something unexpected: a striking paternal diversity. About half carried the QM3 marker, the same ancestral signature found among native peoples from Alaska to Chile. But almost the same number possessed its oldest ancestor, QMEH2, along with rare branches such as QZ768, QL663, and QZ7NE, lineages associated with invaders from the northern deserts, Toltec survivors, and migrants from far beyond the Mexican plateau. The enormous variety did not seem like a simple genetic drift, but a shockwave. And this surge hit precisely during the period when the empire exploded in expansion. Between 1325 and 1450, the same centuries in which local lineages disappeared from the region, the number of distinct Y chromosome types increased by almost 40%. The timing was too perfect to ignore. This further confirmed that it wasn't a single clan expanding, but many groups merging, likely northern Chichimek warrior bands joining with survivors from the valley to form something new and unstoppable. And here's the big twist. The Aztecs were not a nation of pure blood. They were a living fusion, a genetic alliance forged by necessity and conquest, held together by power, not inheritance. When scientists traced the patterns of the Y chromosome throughout central Mexico, they realized that the empire had done something no civilization had done before. But what exactly did they do? The empire rewrote its own lineage. Genetic research on the Y chromosome in central Mexico reveals a dark side of Aztec rule, a pattern of systematic biological replacement. Following conquests, native male lineages were frequently eliminated and replaced with genetic markers from the Mexica military elite, such as the QM3 haplogroup. The data show a drastic ratio of 3 Mexica fathers for every local father in just one generation, suggesting that the empire sought not only material tribute, but also deliberate genomic control over subjugated peoples. This process was sustained by the forced displacement of entire populations, organized into units called calpulli. Families were treated as merchandise, moved hundreds of kilometers under brutal conditions that resulted in high mortality, as evidenced by mass burials along trade routes. The result was a complete rewriting of the region's genetic map. Entire ancestries, both paternal and maternal, were erased and replaced in a few decades. What history recorded as cultural unification was, in fact, an organized dismantling of lineages whose echoes can still be detected in the DNA of modern populations. Ghosts in the blood of modern Mexicans. When scientists began testing the DNA of modern Mexicans, they didn't expect to find the Aztec Empire still pulsing within them. But that's exactly what the data revealed. The same genetic patterns that marked forced replacement centuries ago still shape the DNA of people alive today, showing that the empire's reach did not end with its fall. It survived in the blood. In 2025, new genomic studies across central Mexico discovered that most modern populations carry only between 20 and 30% ancestry from pre-Aztec peoples, such as the Otomi, Sach, Acolua, and others who once ruled their own valleys. The remainder of the genetic makeup comes from the Mexica coalition that replaced them. It's a gigantic change, confirming that the empire not only dominated politically, but reshaped the population itself. These findings are not theoretical. Today, when someone in Mexico City or Puebla takes a home DNA test, the results often light up like a history lesson written in their chromosomes. A trace of Otomi ancestry may survive through a grandmother's lineage, but most markers point back to the Mexica heartland, the same regions responsible for the genetic waves that followed the conquests. The biological mark of the empire never disappeared. She simply blended in so deeply that no one noticed she was still there. But this legacy goes beyond identity. It affects the body itself. Geneticists studying immune responses have discovered that some of the same population shifts that wiped out ancient lineages also altered how people respond to disease. Aztec purges may have eliminated certain immune traits and strengthened others, leaving behind genetic trade-offs that still influence health today. In some regions, resistance to tropical infections is unusually high, but vulnerability to autoimmune diseases has also increased, a hidden legacy of selection through conquest. The revelation that the Aztec Empire may have operated a system of population replacement has generated a profound emotional and academic dilemma about Mexican identity. While the empire is a symbol of resistance, genetic data suggests a history of erasure and biological control, where lineages were deliberately replaced. This duality forces current communities to reflect on whether their ancestry is the result of cultural unity or demographic engineering imposed by force. In the scientific field, Dr. Deborah Bolnick's article, published in May 2025, further explored this division. By analyzing human remains in Casas Grandes and Zaltican, Bolnick identified drastic changes in mitochondrial DNA that indicate forced displacement and intentional control of clans. While geneticists see evidence of an imperial tool of domination, traditional archaeologists contest the conclusions, warning of sample bias. Since tombs of elites, conquerors, are better preserved than those of the common population, the genetic record may be distorted, favoring the thesis of replacement over gradual assimilation. This debate has transformed history into an ethical and technical battleground. The discussion is no longer confined to books. It questions whether DNA alone can narrate human complexity or whether genetic interpretations risk simplifying centuries of cultural interactions. What remains is the perception that behind national pride, the genetic code preserves marks of a power system that shaped Mexico in a much more aggressive and organized way than legend suggested. In October 2025, YouTube channels and podcasts were buzzing with intense debates. Bolnick's findings were pitted against the outrage of his critics. Some argued that if his theory were correct, it would explain why Hernán Cortés encountered so little resistance centuries later. Because the Aztecs had already fragmented the region through forced displacement. Others accused Bolnick of projecting modern guilt onto ancient empires, calling the term genetic imperialism sensationalist. The dispute divided experts worldwide. One side sees the Aztecs as cold strategists who mastered population control long before modern states. The other insists that this interpretation erases the resistance and autonomy of conquered peoples. What is at stake is not merely scientific pride. Bolnick's data is correct. The empire once celebrated as a symbol of indigenous strength could become proof of how power rewrites blood, identity, and memory. And the most unsettling part? The next excavation could prove one side right or bury the truth once again. The DNA of the future and the ultimate secret of the empire. Something strange is happening in laboratories around the world, and it's bringing the Aztec Empire back to life in ways no one ever imagined possible. For a moment, forget the ancient bones. The latest genetic advances of 2025 are extracting DNA directly from soil, mud, and even air, rewriting everything we thought we knew about the true reach of the empire. In October 2025, a wave of new results began connecting the dots. Environmental DNA, fragments of genetic material preserved in mud and water, is now revealing traces of Aztec-era populations in places where no tombs have ever been found. In the remains of the canals of Tenochtitlan, scientists have detected genetic signatures linked to haplogroup QM3, a lineage long associated with populations in central Mexico. Most shockingly, these same variants are appearing hundreds of kilometers to the north, along ancient trade routes. This suggests that the Aztecs did not dominate solely through the sword or sacrifices. The history of pre-Columbian civilizations is being rewritten by genetic analyses that reveal a scenario of constant movement and demographic remixing. Mitochondrial DNA and genomic studies show that Mesoamerica was not composed of static empires, but of populations in chaotic flows of migration, collapse, and renewal, long before the arrival of Europeans. Aztec influence, for example, appears to have extended far beyond its known borders, reaching Mayan and Inca territories, while the famous Mayan collapse is now seen more as a population transformation than an extinction. One of the most fascinating frontiers of this research lies in California, where genetic markers may finally confirm the legend of Aztlan. If it is proven that the Aztecs traversed the continent from north to south, the migration ceases to be a myth and becomes a historical record of a people in transcontinental movement. Through artificial intelligence tools that map isotopes and gene flows, science reveals that the Aztec system of planned movement of people, treating lineages as living cargo, may have been the standard in the region. The Aztec Empire may have disappeared politically, but its genetic code remains alive. The findings suggest that the reach of this civilization profoundly shaped the biological identity of the Americas, leaving marks that still whisper in our cells today. This new perspective transforms the Aztec legacy from a tale of conquest into a story of genetic and cultural persistence. What are your thoughts on this invisible impact? Did the empire truly fall, or did it simply become diluted within the current population? Share your opinion and subscribe to follow the next chapters of this scientific journey.